A young woman lost her life in 1975. The case unfortunately went cold, but with the help from witnesses coming forward and DNA advancements, the breakthrough came nearly 50 years later. On August 6, 1975, 17-year-old Laurel Jean Mitchell disappeared after leaving her job at the Epworth Forest Church Camp Snack Bar in North Webster, Indiana. She was supposed to meet friends at an amusement park about a half-mile away. One witness told the police he had seen Laurel walking and had waved to her shortly after when she would have left work. Laurel was never seen alive again. Her body was found the next day, on August 7th, in the Elkhart River by some fishermen after she failed to return home. Although Laurel's cause of demise was ruled as drowning, the police said that the autopsy report suggested that she had fought for her life, so police initiated a slaying investigation. Two people who lived near the road Laurel would have been walking on after her shift at work told the police that they heard a loud car go by, turn around, and then stop near their home. One of those people told the police that he heard what sounded like someone slamming the trunk of a car shut. When he stepped outside, he saw two cars leaving the area. The other resident told the police that at around 10 p.m., a car turned around in the driveway next door, and as it came back by her house, she heard several voices say, "Let's get," or "Let's get her." She said the car was very loud and dark in color. Even though the detectives followed up on these leads, no arrests were made and the case went cold. Then in 2013, a detective with the Noble County Sheriff's Department was contacted by a woman in Florida who told him that in 1975, when she was 16, she dated a man named John Wayne Lehman. The two had gone to a party, and when driving her home, Lehman admitted his involvement in a crime that he had committed with his friend Fred Bandy. In 2014, the investigators interviewed a man who said that when he was a sophomore at West Noble High School in 1975, Fred Bandy had told him that he had committed the crime. Another person also came forward to say Bandy had admitted to the crime at a party. In 2019, Laurel's clothing was resubmitted to the Indiana State Police Laboratory Division for examination and DNA testing. A DNA sample was taken from Bandy in late 2022, and it showed he was 13 billion times more likely to be the contributor of the DNA on Laurel's clothing than any other unknown person. Finally, after almost 50 years, in February 2023, the police arrested 69-year-old Fred Bandy and 69-year-old John Wayne Lehman. Their arrests were made possible by advancements in lab technology that allowed the investigators to connect both men to Laurel's demise. The investigators believe Bandy and Lehman grabbed Laurel and put her in Bandy's 1971 Oldsmobile. They then took her to the Mallard Roost public access site on County Road 600 North in Noble County, where they drowned her. Both men steered clear of the law and trouble for the next nearly 5 decades. Bandy, however, was convicted of crimes multiple times in Noble Circuit Court throughout the years, which allowed the investigators to gather his DNA. Lehman appeared via video from the Miami Correctional Facility for his sentencing hearing after previously pleading guilty to a count of conspiracy to commit slaying in connection with the demise of Laurel. As part of Lehman's sentencing, he was given 613 days credit for time already served. Lehman said in an August deposition that Bandy assaulted Laurel and drowned her. Lehman denied participating in the assault or the slaying, and said his fear of Bandy kept him from trying to stop the crimes. On October 11, 2024, he received an 8-year prison sentence for his role in the girl's demise. Bandy was found guilty of slaying in connection to the demise of Laurel. On October 22, 2024, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole for the 1975 slaying of 17-year-old Laurel. In 2004, a man fatally shot Corey Devon Smith in his mother's driveway. 20 years later, while behind bars, a man finally confessed to the slaying. On June 12, in 2004, 21-year-old Corey Devon Smith was fatally shot near 2766 Royal Palm Avenue in Fort Myers, Florida, in front of his mother's house. After grabbing a charger from his home, Corey was shot 5 times on the way to the car, leaving him to succumb to his injuries on the ground. Corey's body was found in the street in front of the home. Witnesses said that a black man in a mask was seen running away from the area and getting into a yellow Cadillac sedan. Dedicated cold case investigators were working tirelessly to close the case on who took the life of Corey. Forensic examination of Corey's car revealed 2 distinct sets of DNA. The first person was not contacted in 2004, and the second has yet to be identified. After revisiting the scene of the crime, the police believe the shooter waited for Corey, shot him, hid in the bushes, and then fled the scene. Over the years, the Fort Myers cold case detectives started building leads, but the detectives did not have enough evidence, which then led to the case going cold. They also believe that they know who the driver of that car was. The detectives said that it was just a matter of connecting those dots and presenting it to the state attorney's office. While looking through cases from that time, the investigators realized that they had enough evidence to potentially find a suspect in Corey's case. With renewed attention and more exposure, the Fort Myers police detectives believes that they may be able to crack this case wide open. In 2022, the Fort Myers Police Department investigated a case involving a friend of Corey, Rodney Terrell Davis. The state attorney's office's cold case slaying unit and the Narcotics Enforcement Task Force, also known as NetForce, also worked on the case. Davis was then arrested as the result of the NetForce investigation. He had been caught arranging narcotics trafficking deals from the Lee County Jail, where he was being held on other charges. Davis was charged with multiple counts of conspiracy and 1 count of trafficking illegal substances. During the investigation, Davis agreed to provide law enforcement with information about his involvement with the 2004 slaying of Corey Smith. Davis then gave a statement to law enforcement, admitting to being the shooter who ended Corey's life. Due to the cold case slaying being able to be closed, the defendant pleaded guilty to the illegal substance charges and was sentenced on both cases. On October 22, 2024, 41-year-old Rodney Davis of Cape Coral was sentenced to 40 years in prison for second-degree slaying with a firearm for taking Corey's life. He was also sentenced to 15 years in prison on the illegal substance charges. A family can have closure after a cold case was solved 20 years after it happened. In 1980, a woman was slain after being kidnapped from a Port Huron neighborhood in Michigan. Decades passed with no justice in sight, until DNA testing led to the arrest of 2 suspects. On November 2, 1980, 21-year-old Karen Umphrey was found deceased in the state game area of Beards Hills, Michigan, near Port Huron, with 2 gunshot wounds to her head. The investigators were able to collect DNA evidence from Karen's body after she was found by hunters, a day after witnesses reported seeing her being forced into a vehicle. The identity of the person responsible for Karen's demise was not known, and despite investigators' attempts to identify the perpetrator, the case went cold. The case was cold for more than 4 decades, although investigators never gave up and continued their pursuit to identify the person responsible for Karen's demise. In 2022, the Michigan State Police submitted forensic DNA evidence from the crime scene to Othram. A comprehensive DNA profile belonging to an unknown contributor was developed by Othram, and forensic genetic genealogy was used to develop new investigative leads in the case. Thanks to these new leads, the Michigan State Police, along with the St. Clair County Sheriff Department, the investigators were able to identify 70-year-old Douglas Laming of Fort Gratiot, Michigan, as a suspect in Karen's slaying. Laming was arrested on December 15, 2023, and was charged with first-degree slaying. At the time, it was not publicly announced that DNA belonging to another contributor was discovered at the crime scene. In 2023, the Michigan State Police submitted the additional forensic DNA evidence from the 1980 crime scene to Othram. A second DNA profile belonging to the second unknown suspect was developed using forensic-grade genome sequencing. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team used the genealogical profile to produce new investigative leads. The leads were returned to the Michigan State Police, who continued their investigative work with the St. Clair County Sheriff Department officials to identify the second suspect in the slaying of Karen. This follow-up investigation led to the identification of the second suspect, 63-year-old Anthony Harris. Harris was 20 years old at the time of Karen's slaying. St. Clair County Sheriff Matt King said, "This is a great example of the fact that we preserve this evidence through the years, use it sparingly, and test it several times." Harris was arrested on February 6, 2024, at work, and the next day, on February 7th, Harris was arraigned and charged with open slaying in Port Huron's 72nd District Court for his alleged involvement in the demise of Karen. Harris's bond was set at $2 million. He pleaded guilty to second-degree slaying in October 2024 and then testified against his accomplice, Douglas Laming. Sheriff King said, "This was a huge step in our case and the first point to getting closure for the family." Investigators said that Harris confessed to forcing Karen into Laming's truck one night in November 1980. He reportedly said that they took Karen to the St. Clair County State Gaming Area, where he and Laming assaulted her. Harris told investigators that he walked away for a moment and heard 2 gunshots, but claims it was dark, so he did not actually see Laming pull the trigger. Laming's trial began on October 8, 2024. During the course of this trial, family, along with the community, was shown the details of the evidence collected through the years. The trial gave jurors the opportunity to hear statements, often conflicting, from both Laming and Harris. The senior prosecuting attorney, Amy Goodrich, presented a compelling case against Laming. After 3 days of trial, the jury was sent to deliberation and after an hour returned with the guilty verdict. Sheriff King said, "It is my hope that after 44 years, the family of Karen Umphrey can breathe a little easier knowing her perpetrators have been brought to justice." Sheriff King also read a statement prepared by the family of Karen. The statement read, "After 44 years of wondering what happened to our beautiful sister, we finally have our answer thanks to the detective work of Detective Ed Silver and the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office. We will forever be grateful to him and the entire staff of the St. Clair County Prosecutor's Office." Prosecutor Amy Goodrich did an excellent job of presenting the evidence to the jury and received the results we have been waiting for decades. Not only was this senseless crime absolutely heartbreaking and a life-changing incident for our family and friends, the accusations and suspicions towards her boyfriend, Fred Hill, over the years had a very negative impact on him, his family, and we sincerely hope that Fred can finally find peace. To all the families amongst all the slayings, we hope and pray that you find the justice that we finally received. Miracles do happen. Harris is scheduled to be sentenced on November 12th, and Laming is scheduled to be sentenced on November 18th. Both face up to life in prison. A 19-year-old woman disappeared from her village in Illinois in 1979. Almost half a century later, the case has finally been solved thanks to DNA evidence. On March 29, 1979, Kathy Halle left her home on Volks Court in North Aurora while on her way to pick up her sister from a nearby shopping center. On her way there, she disappeared. Initially, the police investigated the case as a missing persons case. That was until 3 weeks later, when Kathy's body was discovered in the Fox River on April 24th. After years of investigations, the authorities determined that there was not enough evidence to identify a suspect, and the case went cold. It was not until 2020 that the authorities revisited the case after linking DNA from Bruce Lindahl to the slaying of another woman named Pamela Maurer. The North Aurora authorities used new forensic technologies to connect DNA evidence found on Kathy's clothing to Lindahl's DNA collected while solving Pamela's case. In October 2024, Detective Ryan Peet from the North Aurora Police Department said, Dahl has been connected to several other cases in this area from that time frame. With this new evidence, along with the evidence from similar cases involving Dahl, we are able to conclude Dahl was responsible for the slaying of Kathy Halle. Dahl, who would often go to the shopping center where Kathy worked, was believed to have abducted her from the parking lot of her apartment complex, and he then drove her to the area where her body was later discovered. Before Dahl could be charged with Kathy's slaying, he lost his life in 1981, while allegedly committing another slaying in Naperville, Illinois. Deputy Chief Joe Gorski read a statement on behalf of the Halle family, who were present at the news conference, saying, "While revisiting this case has been incredibly difficult, we are deeply grateful to finally have closure after 45 long years. Thanks to advancements in DNA technologies and groundbreaking tools, we are hopeful that other families will not have to endure the same pain and uncertainty that we faced for so many years." In the late 1980s, the residents of a small Fairview County town in Danbury, Connecticut, were terrified of becoming the next victim of a series of crimes that struck their town. Women and girls feared for their lives, scared that they could be the next victim of the kidnapping and brutal assault. The series of crimes happened in the area of Lake Avenue and Merrimack Street. Decades after the disturbing crimes, the investigators were finally able to positively identify one suspect due to new resources that were not available back in the 1980s. In 1989, one of the victims was an 11-year-old girl. She was kidnapped and assaulted. The initial investigation started on April 23, 1989. Danbury police responded to a complaint at the victim's residence in the city's Lake Avenue and Merrimack Avenue neighborhood. The girl woke up sometime between 3 and 4 a.m. to a masked young man covering her nose and mouth while holding a knife to her throat. The girl was asleep in the living room of her home, with two of her brothers nearby, when two suspects picked her up off the couch she was sleeping on and carried her out of the house. Once they were outside, she said the two individuals put her on the ground, lifted her to her feet, and told her to walk. The girl said that she did as they said, and she started to walk, with the two suspects behind her. One of them was holding a knife to her back. They brought her to an under-construction residence on Merrimack Street, where they forced her inside at knife point. They instructed her to go to the second floor of the building, where she was forced to undress and lay down on a plywood subfloor. The victim told the police she was repeatedly assaulted by the masked assailant, while the other held a knife to her head. During the initial investigation, the girl described the masked suspect as a white, heavy-set male who was about 5 feet 8 inches tall. The other suspect was described as a white male with a skinny build, yellow wavy or curly hair down to his neck, and approximately 5 feet 9 inches tall. After she was assaulted multiple times, they forced her to get dressed. They threatened to end her life and her mother's if she told anyone about what happened. They then walked her back to her residence, where she said they instructed her to go back inside through the rear door, and then they fled on foot. Sometime after returning home on that morning of April 23rd, the girl told her mother what happened. Her mother contacted the Danbury Police Department, and the girl was taken to the Danbury Hospital for examination and an assault evaluation. The investigators determined that the suspects had entered the victim's home through an opened kitchen window, and they obtained fingerprints from its exterior. They also found wood shavings on the couch in the living room, where the victim had been sleeping the night of her abduction, as well as on the floor next to the couch and in the victim's hair. The police located the under-construction home on Merrimack Street and found the structure consistent with the victim's description of where the assault occurred. The victim was later taken to the location where she identified the second-floor location of the assault, and investigators found wood shavings consistent with those found in her home and hair at the site. The investigators also found and collected a small puddle of evidence, including blood, in the area where she said the assault occurred. The evidence was submitted to the Connecticut State Forensic Laboratory for testing in 1989, but no suspects were identified at the time, and the case went cold. 3 decades later, in November 2023, the victim inquired about the case. The department's Special Victims Unit decided to reopen those files and approach the attacks with fresh eyes and new technology. Danbury police said that they requested a re-examination of evidence and got a hit in February 2024, linking 54-year-old David Coffey's DNA to that found in the blood mixture and other evidence collected from the Merrimack Street residence in 1989. They secured a warrant charging him with kidnapping in the first degree, and Coffey was arrested on October 22nd. Based on the results of recent DNA testing from the evidence seized in 1989, the police said that they believe Coffey was the masked suspect. Coffey was 17 years old in April 1989 and lived within close proximity of the crime scene related to the investigation. His home on Peace Street at that time was only about 600 feet away from the victim's residence. Coffey came up as a matching DNA profile through the CODIS system. He is a convicted felon and is currently on parole for felony charges out of the state of Georgia. His status as a parolee followed an 8-year prison stint for aggravated battery and firearm possession in June 2013. He was released from prison in November 2022. Following the DNA hit linking Coffey to the evidence, the authorities obtained a new DNA sample from the victim and had it sent to the Connecticut State Forensic Laboratory for analysis for comparison purposes. The lab also used new technology that was not yet available in 1989 to examine swabs collected during the victim's assault examination and samples of the evidence found inside the Merrimack Street building. It was through that testing and analysis the police said that a match to his DNA profile was determined. A comparison performed in July 2024 of the fingerprints lifted from the window of the victim's home in 1989 to those obtained from Coffey during a past arrest came back inconclusive. Though the warrant for his arrest alleges that he assaulted the victim, he has not been charged with assault. While there are exceptions depending on the age of the victim and other factors, Connecticut's statute of limitations for felony assault generally is 20 years. Because he was 17 at the time of the alleged crimes, his case was initially filed in juvenile court and later transferred to adult court. Coffey remains held on a $750,000 bond at the Bridgeport Correctional Center and is set to appear in State Superior Court in Danbury on November 20th, 2024. The police have not yet identified the second suspect and have asked for the public's help to identify him. The authorities released the original composite sketch of the second suspect from 1989. They are continuing to investigate several similar crimes that happened in the late 1980s, and they are asking anyone with information to come forward. They are asking people who might know something about the incidents to call Detective John Bazile at 203-797-4668, the Danbury Police Investigative Services Bureau at 203-797-4662, or the anonymous tips line at 203-790-TIPS 8477. For nearly 40 years, the brutal slaying of 24-year-old Terry Dollowy cast a dark shadow over Wisconsin. In February 1985, Terry mysteriously vanished from her home, and just days later, her decapitated, burning body was discovered in a rural culvert. Despite exhaustive efforts, the perpetrator remained elusive, and as the years passed, many believed the case would forever remain unsolved. But after decades of ends, a shocking arrest and newly uncovered DNA evidence have reignited hope, and the long-dormant case may finally see justice served. Terry Dollowy was originally from River Forest, Illinois, a suburban area near Chicago. Raised in a middle-class family, she was known to be a dedicated student and a hard worker, balancing her academic life with her job as a bar manager. At the time of the tragedy, Terry was a senior at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, studying finance. She had moved to La Crosse to pursue her education, and her ambitions reflected her drive to create a stable and successful life. Terry's work at Piggy's, an upscale restaurant in the heart of La Crosse, allowed her to support herself while attending school. Terry shared a trailer home with her fiancé, Russell Lee, in the small community of Berry Mills. The couple seemed to be leading a stable life together, and Terry was looking forward to graduating and starting her career. She had a small white poodle named Susie, whom she loved dearly. On February 14, 1985, Terry finished her shift at Piggy's. It was a cold winter evening when she returned to the trailer home. Her purse, car, and all her personal belongings were left behind, but Terry and her Susie vanished without a trace. The following days brought mounting fear and confusion. Terry's fiancé reported her missing, but there were no immediate clues. Then, 4 days later, on a remote road in Vernon County, a grisly discovery was made. A passerby reported a fire in a culvert, where the police soon found Terry's decapitated and burned body. The investigation into Terry's slaying was extensive, but despite early efforts, it was marked by frustration and ends. Hundreds of people were interviewed and potential leads were followed, but nothing concrete emerged. One of the initial focuses was Terry's personal life. The investigators looked into her fiancé, Russell, who had been the last person to see her alive. His gambling habits and close association with pool tournaments raised suspicions. But despite the scrutiny, there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime. The investigation expanded to include other people in her social circle, including friends and co-workers, but none of these avenues produced a suspect. Adding to the challenge for investigators was that Terry's head and her missing dog were never found, leaving investigators without critical evidence that could have shed light on how and why she met such a tragic fate. Then, in a frustrating turn, the case began to grow cold. With no DNA technology at the time, and only circumstantial evidence to go on, law enforcement had little to work with. They believed the perpetrator had meticulously planned the crime, using an accelerant to burn her body and destroy potential evidence. Still, authorities never gave up. Over the years, the investigators periodically revisited the case, re-interviewing witnesses and re-examining the evidence. In the late 1990s, a paint chip was discovered on a sheet that had been wrapped around Terry's body, hinting at a possible vehicle used in the crime. But again, it was not enough to lead to an arrest. The investigators continued to carry the torch, hoping that one day, new technology or a fresh lead would finally bring answers to this case. That day arrived in 2023, when advances in DNA technology cracked open the mystery and pointed to a suspect who had been hiding in plain sight. The breakthrough in Terry Dollowy's case was set in motion by a series of advancements in forensic science, specifically DNA technology, which had evolved significantly. The investigators made a crucial decision to revisit old evidence, hoping that new methods could yield results that had been impossible decades earlier. The authorities obtained a search warrant to collect DNA from Michael Raymond Popp, a truck driver from Tomah, Wisconsin, who had long flown under the radar in the investigation. Though Popp had been interviewed back in 1985, he was never considered a serious suspect at the time, as he described his connection to Terry as merely a casual acquaintance. But this new push in the investigation brought Popp back into focus. A DNA swab taken from Popp in January 2023 was sent to a forensic lab for comparison. The results were shocking. Popp's DNA matched the samples collected from Terry's autopsy. This was the first solid evidence linking Popp to the crime. During interviews with the investigators, Popp initially claimed he had only seen Terry a few times and did not really know her that well. But when asked why his DNA matched the male DNA found inside Terry's body, Popp responded, I maybe had a little affair with her for 6 to 8 months." When the investigators pressed him on why he had never mentioned this before, Popp explained, "Well, it is a pretty serious case there. Did not want to be associated with it." Though Popp maintained his innocence, saying he was not a violent person, the match provided the investigators with the concrete evidence they needed to arrest him on September 24, 2024. At a bond hearing in Vernon County Circuit Court, Special Prosecutor Kevin Croninger requested a $2 million cash bond. Judge Timothy Gaskell set the bond at $1 million. Popp, who was not represented by an attorney at the time, attempted to engage prosecutor Croninger in a discussion about an unrelated case in Monroe County. In that case, he faces charges of stalking, threats, resisting arrest, and illegal substance possession. At one point, Pop expressed his disbelief, stating he was flabbergasted as to why he was in court or in custody for the slaying charge. If convicted of Terry's case, Pop faces the possibility of life in prison. For nearly 4 decades, Terry's family and the community were left with unanswered questions. With modern DNA technology linking Pop to the crime, there is hope that the long-awaited answers will finally come to light. Though Pop denies responsibility, the upcoming legal proceedings may at last bring closure to those who have spent years seeking justice for Terry Dollowy. A woman and mother who had moved to Las Vegas Valley, Nevada, with her boyfriend in the spring of 1994, went missing on the night of August 26th. She was found deceased the next day. The person responsible for her demise remained unknown for nearly 30 years. On August 27, 1994, 2 men were hiking when they discovered the remains of an unidentified individual on Lake Mead Boulevard near the entrance to the Lake Mead recreation area. It was determined that the remains were that of a white female. Her body had been dragged and was placed in a washed area. After an autopsy done the following day, the Clark County Coroner's Office determined that the remains were that of 27-year-old Melanie White. The police believed that she was dragged from a car into the washed area, strangled and slain by blunt force trauma. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department led the investigation, and many leads were received and tracked. Unfortunately, none were successful in identifying the person responsible for Melanie's demise, and the case went cold. In 2010, the department's cold case detectives reviewed the case and submitted evidence from the crime scene for traditional DNA testing. A STR profile was developed for an unknown male suspect. The profile was uploaded to CODIS, but there was no match to a known individual. In 2021, using funding provided by Vegas Justice League, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department submitted evidence to Othram. They hoped to determine if advanced DNA testing could finally identify the person responsible for taking the life of Melanie. Using forensic-grade genome sequencing, Othram scientists developed a DNA profile for the unknown male suspect. This profile was used in a genealogical search by Othram's forensic genetic genealogy team to develop new leads in the case. These leads were returned to the detectives with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and a follow-up investigation was conducted. This follow-up investigation led to the identification of potential relatives of the suspect. On October 22, 2024, comparison DNA tests were conducted, leading to the positive identification of the suspect as Arthur Lavery, who was born September 7, 1955. Lavery grew up in the Las Vegas area. He was 38 years old when he ended Melanie's life. Lavery passed away in May 2021 due to COVID-19 complications. Lavery was previously arrested in the Las Vegas area for battery. During a press event, Melanie's younger brothers Walter and Jason White spoke about their late sister. They said, "We will always miss Melanie and believe that the solving of her case will help bring a measure of peace to her and all of us." Jason and Walter say many members of their family were broken as they mourned the loss of Melanie. They have found closure with this news. Walter said that she was a very nice person and that her demise was a tragic loss. Jason also said that they loved her very much. Melanie's son that she had at the time of her slaying is 33 years old. For 2 decades in Flint, Michigan, the unsolved case of Shannon Holihan lay dormant. His body was discovered in a parking lot, partially clothed and bearing the marks of a brutal attack, while his cherished 1994 Chevrolet Corvette vanished without a trace. Years turned into decades, and all the leads had gone cold. But then, in a twist of fate, the breakthrough came, and DNA evidence finally linked a suspect to the crime. Shannon Daniel Holihan was born and raised in Grand Blanc, Michigan, where he developed a reputation as a bright and caring individual. He attended local schools and excelled academically, ultimately pursuing a degree in computer programming. By the time he was in his early 30s, Shannon had established a successful career at Kmart Corporation's headquarters in Troy. Outside of work, Shannon was a devoted son, caring for his mother, who was a stroke survivor. Shannon was also a member of the LGBTQ community, and during the late 1990s, he frequented local bars, including the State Bar and Club Triangle in Flint. These venues were popular gathering spots for the community, offering a sense of camaraderie and acceptance. No one could have imagined that a casual evening out would take a dark turn, setting in motion a series of events. On the evening of May 26, 1998, Shannon was last seen leaving his workplace, likely feeling the excitement of a night out ahead. He had plans to visit the State Bar, a popular bar on Dort Highway in Flint, known for its social scene. Witnesses reported seeing him at the bar earlier that night, where he mingled with friends and enjoyed the company of other patrons. As the night went on, Shannon's presence was noted by several acquaintances, and he seemed to be in good spirits. But as the hours passed, concerns began to arise when he failed to return home. His mother, who relied on his support, became increasingly worried when he did not check in with her. The following morning, on May 27th, at around 8:30 a.m., a restaurant owner discovered Shannon's unconscious body in an alley behind the Empress of China restaurant located near the bar. He was found partially clothed, wearing only a t-shirt, and had sustained severe blunt force trauma to the back of his head, indicating a violent attack. The investigators later pieced together that Shannon had likely encountered his attacker after leaving the bar. Eyewitness accounts suggested that he had spoken to a young man on a mountain bike shortly before disappearing. Despite immediate efforts to locate his missing 1994 Chevrolet Corvette, which was found stolen, leads quickly ran dry. Shannon was taken to Hurley Medical Center, where he remained in a coma for 2 days before succumbing to his injuries on May 30th. His demise would be the beginning of a lengthy, unsolved case. The breakthrough in the investigation of Shannon Holihan's case finally came in 2024, more than 25 years after the crime. The Flint Police Department's Cold Case Unit, established with funding from the American Rescue Plan Act and the Mott Foundation, had been actively reviewing unsolved cases, and Shannon's was among them. In a fortunate turn of events, the detectives re-examined existing evidence, particularly the DNA samples collected from under Shannon's fingernails. This evidence had been preserved since the initial investigation and had remained a potential link to his attacker. The Michigan State Police Crime Lab, utilizing advanced forensic techniques that had developed significantly over the years, conducted a new analysis of the samples. As the lab worked through its backlog of cases, it ultimately found a match. The DNA belonged to Eric Dukes, a 53-year-old man who had recently been arrested for an unrelated crime. This match was crucial as it suggested that Shannon had struggled with his attacker, and the DNA under his nails indicated a defensive action, likely taken during the violent encounter. Upon confirming the DNA match, the detectives revisited the circumstances surrounding the night of the tragedy. They investigated Duke's background and any connections he might have had to Shannon or the locations he frequented. They also began to piece together a timeline that connected Dukes to Shannon's last known whereabouts. The cold case unit's findings prompted them to seek additional information. A tip from Crime Stoppers, unrelated to Shannon's case, led to further evidence tying Dukes to the crime. As they gathered more details, the investigators found witness accounts suggesting that Dukes and Shannon had interacted that night, painting a clearer picture of the events leading up to the crime. With this evidence, Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton announced charges against Dukes for felony related to Shannon's slaying and carjacking. The ability to finally charge a suspect was not only a victory for the cold case unit, but also a significant moment for Shannon Holihan's family and friends, who had long sought justice for his tragic demise. In the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina, a dark chapter from nearly 3 decades ago has resurfaced, reigniting the pursuit of justice for a victim long believed to be forgotten. A man was arrested and charged in connection with a brutal assault that took place in 1998. It is an arrest that is a perfect example of how advancements in forensic science are bringing long cold cases back to life, decades after they have occurred. In the late hours of that fateful day in 1998, a woman's life was forever altered. While the specific details of the assault remain a mystery to protect the identity of the victim, it is known that the incident was violent and horrific. The victim reported being kidnapped and assaulted. Despite her courage in coming forward, the investigation into the crime yielded little progress. The case eventually went cold, becoming just another statistic in a long list of unsolved assaults. Years later, hope reemerged through the Assault Kit initiative launched by the North Carolina Department of Justice, which aims at addressing the backlog of untested assault kits across the state. As part of this initiative, the evidence from the 1998 case was re-examined, leading to a significant breakthrough. A DNA sample collected at the crime scene was entered into CODIS. In October 2024, in a remarkable turn of events, a positive match was found. David Lee Toney's DNA profile was linked to the evidence gathered from the crime scene. This connection breathed new life into the investigation, prompting law enforcement to act swiftly. With the arrest of Toney, the Raleigh Police Department hopes to provide the victim with the justice she has long awaited. Toney faces serious felony charges, including first-degree assault, attempted first-degree offense, kidnapping, and assault inflicting serious bodily injury. For over 3 decades, the brutal slaying of 69-year-old Stella McCrary remained one of Mobile, Alabama's most haunting unsolved crimes. Her life, once filled with quiet peacefulness, ended violently one cold January morning in 1988. The search for answers would stretch across years. Stella McCrary lived a peaceful life on Burton Avenue in Mobile. Known for her kindness and strong-willed nature, she had built a small, content world for herself. On January 23, 1988, Stella was found lifeless in her home. Her son Tommy made the gruesome discovery. Stella had been stabbed multiple times, and there were signs that robbery might have been the motive. But despite the urgency of the investigation, no arrest was made, and the case grew cold. Mobile police began looking into potential suspects, but the investigation ultimately stalled. In the years following the crime, the investigation seemed to lose momentum. The case was revisited periodically, but the breakthrough that everyone had hoped for never materialized. That was until March 2021, when Mobile police cold case detectives took a fresh look at the evidence. With new technology and renewed determination, they began to reassemble the puzzle pieces, looking deeper into old evidence and fresh leads. It was not until the detectives revisited the case that they began to connect the dots. Among the names that resurfaced was Anthony Hayes, a man who had long been a suspect, but whose connection to the crime had never been definitively proven. As the investigation advanced, new evidence, including DNA links, confirmed Hayes' involvement. He was arrested in Arizona in early August 2024 and is awaiting extradition to Alabama. With Hayes in custody, the mystery of Stella's slaying is finally solved. After more than 30 years, the McCrary family is one step closer to closure. The case serves as a reminder that even the longest of cold cases can eventually be solved, and that no matter how much time passes, justice can still catch up to those who thought they had escaped it. In Ayodhya, India, a brutal 17-year-old case has resurfaced, rekindling memories of a tragedy that shattered a family and eluded justice for over a decade. A young man, Mahavir Singh, was slain in the quiet village of Tulsipur Maya. But with the passage of time, hope dwindled and the case seemed to slip by, completely forgotten. until the recent arrests of 2 fugitives brings renewed hope that the case will be solved at last. Mahavir Singh was a beloved son and a vibrant member of the Tulsipur Majha community. But in 2007, his life was abruptly cut short after a brutal act of gunfire took his life. The investigation into the demise of Mahavir began immediately after the shocking incident. With the community reeling from the tragedy, the Gonda police faced the daunting task of piecing together evidence while grappling with the emotional weight of the case. Initial inquiries led them to identify 2 primary suspects, Govind alias Sanjay and Sitaram Das. Both men were well known in their respective regions. Govind from Lakhisarai district in Bihar, and Das from Hanuman Kuti Ramgat in Ayodhya. But despite efforts to apprehend the suspects, both managed to evade capture, prompting law enforcement to intensify their investigation. The police employed various tactics, including interviewing witnesses and examining the crime scene for clues. But as the days turned into weeks and then months, leads became scarce, and the trail grew cold. In a bid to revitalize the case and encourage community involvement, the Gonda police announced a reward of 15,000 rupees for information leading to the arrest of the fugitives. This move aimed to galvanize locals, urging them to come forward with any tips or insights that could aid in locating Govind and Das. The reward not only served as an incentive, but also emphasized the police's commitment to seeking justice for Mahavir's family. Even with the promise of financial incentive, it became evident that the suspects had successfully gone underground, further frustrating the investigators. In the aftermath, Mahavir's family bravely took a stand, filing a case against Govind and Das. As the years passed, the police seized properties and submitted charge sheets while the perpetrators continued to roam free. Years of relentless searching culminated in a breakthrough in October 2024. After efforts by the Gonda police and the collaborative support of the Ayodhya police, the authorities received actionable intelligence that led them closer to the whereabouts of the accused. Acting on the arrest warrants issued by the Civil Judge Senior Division ACJM, in Gonda, the Ram Janmabhoomi police sprang into action. The police first focused their attention on Sitaram Das. Following leads, they conducted a search operation near the Hanuman Kuti temple. In the late afternoon, they positioned themselves strategically behind the temple, monitoring the area for suspicious activity. The effort paid off when the officers spotted a man fitting Das's description. His demeanor and movements raised suspicions among the team. The officers approached cautiously and confirmed his identity as Das alias Vijay Chella Ramcharan Das. He was arrested without incident, and the police recovered documents related to the violent crime from his immediate vicinity, solidifying the evidence against him. The search for Govind alias Sanjay continued. Utilizing information gathered during the initial arrest, the police traced Govind to Laxman Kila, a well-known landmark in Ayodhya. The officers swarmed the area, determined to apprehend the second suspect. In a well-coordinated effort, they located Sanjay, who was attempting to blend into the crowd. Realizing he was surrounded, he attempted to flee, but the police quickly apprehended him, securing the arrest with minimal disturbance. Both arrests were a victory for law enforcement and brought closure to a case that had stayed hidden in the shadows for nearly 2 decades. The police expressed their relief at finally being able to serve justice to Mahavir Singh's family, whose anguish had been compounded by the long wait for accountability. The recovery of key documents at the residences of the accused added weight to the prosecution's case, ensuring that both men would face trial for their alleged roles in the crime. As the news of the arrest spread, the community of Gonda breathed a sigh of relief, hopeful that this long-awaited chapter would soon reach its end in a court of law. On the night of March 16, 2011, Isaia Hernandez was shot in a quiet Ansonia, Connecticut parking lot. What was thought to be a routine illegal substance deal turned into a robbery gone horribly wrong, and Isaia was left lifeless in the cold. For years, the case seemed unsolvable, with only whispers and rumors surrounding the details of his end. A breakthrough in the investigation has led authorities to a key suspect, one who had remained elusive for over a decade. Isaia Hernandez was a 25-year-old father trying to build a better future despite the struggles of his past. Born and raised in Ansonia, Isaia faced many challenges growing up. He had a difficult childhood, dragged down by financial instability and a broken home, but he had always been determined to carve out a different path for himself. Isaia was no stranger to hardship, and like many young men in his community, he battled against the pull of street life, knowing all too well the temptation of quick money and the influence of bad company. Even still, he was a devoted father, and his son, who was in many ways the anchor in his life, was the reason he worked hard to turn things around. But on March 16, 2011, everything changed when Isaiah's past collided with his present in an act of violence, ending his life far too soon and leaving his family and his son heartbroken. It was a cold, ordinary night in Ansonia, and Isaia had made his way to the Ansonia Express Mart, a familiar stop along his daily route. He was there to meet two men for an illegal substance transaction. Isaia, trying to keep his head above water, had agreed to meet them in the parking lot to sell them substances, an exchange he hoped would help him take care of his son and stay afloat. What he did not know was that the two men had other plans. What was meant to be a simple deal quickly turned into something much darker. As the three men stood by Isaiah's car, the two men turned on him, intending to rob him instead of making the transaction. The details of what happened next are murky, but it is clear that Isaia never stood a chance. Witnesses say Isaia tried to escape, stumbling out of the car and collapsing in the parking lot as shots rang out, the violence erupting without warning. He was struck by 3 gunshots, each one entering his back, and each one taking him further from the life he had fought so hard to make for himself. The perpetrators fled the scene, leaving him to bleed out, alone, in the cold parking lot. His family would later learn that the men who had been in the car with him that night were involved in more than just a simple illegal substance deal. They had conspired to take what was not theirs, and it cost Isaia everything. After Isaia was gunned down, the investigation into his slaying began immediately, but quickly hit roadblocks. Witnesses were scarce, and while there were initial suspicions, the case remained unsolved. In the days following the shooting, a few anonymous tips trickled into the Ansonia Police Department, mentioning the name of 19-year-old Elijah Stanford. The detectives pursued these leads, but were unable to tie Stanford directly to the crime without more concrete evidence. Surveillance footage from the Express Mart helped confirm that Isaia had been in the car with at least 2 other men, but their identities remained unclear at the time. The real breakthrough only came nearly a decade later. A combination of advances in forensic techniques, cooperation with federal agencies, and persistent investigative work eventually led police to reopen the case. Anonymous sources, who had initially been reluctant to come forward, began sharing critical information about Stanford, as well as Luis Marquez, who was 18 at the time of the brutal crime. It was revealed that both men had plotted to rob Isaia during an illegal substance deal gone wrong. Marquez briefly fled to New York after the slaying, while Stanford was already incarcerated at Manson Youth Institution for an unrelated crime. Their movements in the aftermath of the shooting, paired with the growing body of evidence, helped the police to zero in on the 2 men. In 2021, 10 years after the tragedy, both Stanford and Marquez were arrested and charged with the violent crime, first-degree robbery, and conspiracy to commit robbery. Both men were placed in custody on $500,000 bond, and though they each posted bond, the charges remained. The investigation did not stop there. Further digging led police to Andrew Spino, who had served as the getaway driver that night. Spino had relocated to Hawaii, where he was incarcerated on unrelated charges. After being extradited to Connecticut in 2022, Spino was also charged. On March 10th, 2024, Luis Marquez accepted a plea deal and then pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter with a firearm and conspiracy to commit first-degree robbery in connection with the shooting. Prosecutors revealed that Marquez fired the fatal shots during the planned robbery, which had been orchestrated by his co-defendant, Elijah Stanford. On August 29th, Marquez was sentenced to 14 years in prison, plus 5 years of probation. He said the following before being sentenced: "I asked the judge to show some mercy, but I know I deserve whatever is coming. I am not going to sit here and act like I do not." Stanford and Spino remain in custody. As these legal proceedings unfold, the decade-old case of Isaia Hernandez's slaying is finally moving toward justice, providing his family some measure of peace after years of unanswered questions. Margaret Simpson, Isaiah's aunt, said, "No amount of time is going to be good enough for us. We lost a loved one, and it is not easy. It is hard." Isaiah's mother, Myra Rivera, said in a statement that was read to the court, "My son would call me every Wednesday, and on that Wednesday, I did not hear from him. Instead, I received a phone call from his girlfriend, trying to explain to me while she was crying that my son lost his life. This was the day my heart was shattered." On January 31st, 2014, a quiet gravel road in Greenville County, South Carolina, became a crime scene when the body of a local teen was found, lifeless and riddled with gunshots. For over 7 years, the case lay cold, with no answers in sight, until a crucial tip reignited the investigation. What followed was a series of shocking arrests and revelations, unraveling a cold case that people were worried was going to remain unsolved. Now one man stands convicted, but the full story is only just beginning to emerge. Before tragedy struck, Marquail Marvista Hellams was a 19-year-old filled with potential and a deep love for football. On January 31st, 2014, the body of Marquail was found by a passerby along a quiet gravel path near Davis Road in Piedmont, South Carolina, as they were walking their dog. The discovery came after Marquail had been shot multiple times and left in the woods. The responding deputies were immediately struck by the brutality of the crime, but there were few clues to explain what had happened. With no witnesses, no clear motive, and no obvious leads, the investigation quickly hit an end. The investigators combed through the details of his life, hoping to uncover a reason for the violent crime. They learned Marquail had been in contact with a few individuals in the hours leading up to his end, including his former roommates. But the exact circumstances surrounding the crime remained unclear. The detectives pieced together that Marquail had likely gone to meet someone he knew for an illegal substance transaction. He had climbed into a car, but the situation quickly turned violent. Marquail was shot and abandoned in the woods, but no one could say why. His former football coach, Rob Searfoss, said, "He is one of those players, even if this had not happened, who touches your heart. If you took the time to get to know him, he was a good kid. He just wanted people to care about him." As the years passed, the case fell into a pile of other cold case files, with no new developments. Yet investigators never gave up. They revisited evidence, re-examined witness statements, and explored every potential lead. Still, it seemed the answers would never come. The case was on the verge of being written off as unsolvable, but little did anyone know, the breakthrough was just around the corner. In 2021, a tip from Crime Stoppers reignited the investigation. The tipster provided law enforcement with critical information that pointed to a vehicle used by the suspects on the night of the crime. This revelation set in motion a chain of events that would finally uncover the truth behind Marquail's tragic demise. The investigators focused their efforts on tracing the vehicle, which was eventually located in Pickens County. Forensic technology, including the use of touch DNA, was instrumental in linking the suspects to the crime. The touch DNA analysis, which identifies minute traces of genetic material left behind on surfaces, revealed traces of the suspect's DNA on the vehicle. With this forensic evidence in hand, the investigation gained traction. The detectives soon pieced together the events leading up to Marquail's demise. They discovered that on January 31st, 2014, Marquail had arranged to meet with his former roommates, Raheem Gerard Griffin and Destiny Maria Fields, along with Chris Thomas Capitino, under the assumption that they were going to purchase substances. What seemed like a routine transaction turned fatal when the group drove to a remote gravel path off Davis Road in Piedmont. The investigators later determined that Marquail was shot multiple times and left to his end outside the vehicle. As they dug deeper, the detectives found evidence of prior conflicts between Marquail and the other suspects. This suggested that the crime was not a random act, but rather the result of escalating tensions between them. These conflicts may have been fueled by personal animosities or grudges, but the exact motivations behind the shooting remained unclear. Even with the motive unclear, the combination of DNA evidence, the Crime Stoppers tip, and the suspect's statements helped to build a compelling case. On April 15, 2021, the law enforcement officers arrested Raheem Gerard Griffin, Destiny Maria Fields, and Chris Thomas Capitino, all of whom were charged with the fatal crime, criminal conspiracy, and other related offenses. Griffin faced additional charges for possession of a weapon during a violent crime. The three suspects were taken into custody and booked into the Greenville County Detention Center, where they were held without bond. On April 18, 2024, after a trial that lasted 4 days, Circuit Judge Patrick Cleburne Fant III sentenced 31-year-old Raheem Gerard Griffin to 45 years for the crime and 5 years for possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Capitino and Fields will still face their own trials in the coming months. The arrest and conviction were a significant turning point in the case, bringing some measure of closure to the Hellams family and Marquail's community, who had long awaited justice. In 1985, a beloved teacher in Kinston, North Carolina, was brutally assaulted and shot in her home. The case went cold for nearly 40 years. Thanks to DNA testing, the case finally came to an end in 2024. On January 8, 1985, members of the Kinston Police Department responded to the residence of 62-year-old Hokie Shepherd, which was located at 1100 East Caswell Street, Kinston. Hokie was a retired school teacher who lived alone. She was found nude on the floor inside her residence by a friend. She was assaulted, shot, and stabbed. The investigators were called to the scene and eventually solicited the help of the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. Her 1983 Burgundy Cadillac had also been stolen, which was eventually found at a local elementary school. Despite countless hours of investigations, the person responsible for Hokie's brutal attack and slaying could not be identified. As the years went by, the detectives continued to work countless hours, leaving no stone unturned, and although the effort seemed endless, the case eventually grew cold. Forensic DNA testing was not as advanced at the time of Hokie's slaying, but the investigators did successfully collect evidence that could be used in future testing. Over the years, the investigation was revisited as advancements in forensic science were made. A STR profile was eventually developed from evidence collected at the crime scene and entered into CODIS. The CODIS search did not yield a match, and Hokie's assault and slaying went unsolved for decades. In 2023, the Kinston Police Department, in collaboration with the FBI and NCSBI, submitted forensic evidence to Othram, in hopes that advanced DNA testing could help to identify the male suspect in the case. Othram scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown suspect. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team, and the FBI team performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. On September 30th, 2024, members of the Kinston Police Department presented the evidence from the genealogy profile to the Lenoir County District Attorney's Office. The results identified the suspect as Thomas Williams Wade Jr., who was 28 at the time of the offense and was initially interviewed as a potential suspect. Soon after the crime, Wade moved from the Kinston area and spent the remainder of his life in Granville County, where he passed away in 2007. If Wade was alive today, he would have been charged with first-degree slaying as well as larceny for the theft of Hokie's car. This information helped to give the family of Hokie Shepherd closure after 39 long years of waiting. Retired Kinston police detective Tommy Lewis was one of the people who first arrived at the scene in 1985. It was Detective Lewis's first slaying case, but he takes pride in the fact that he and the rest of the police department never gave up. Over the years, he never stopped thinking about Hokie. The son of the suspect, Thomas Wade III, says he found out that his dad was a suspect after receiving hundreds of phone calls and messages after the Kinston police made the announcement. He feels his father is being painted as guilty without proper due process, and he is left to defend his father's character. Thomas said, "My father is no longer here, so why is my family being tortured and publicly humiliated? That is not right." The situation happened 40 years ago, but this is not justice. This is opening wounds. Both the victim and the accused have been long past. If my father did do this, then he should have stood justice for that. However, Thomas says he believes the public has already decided that his father is guilty. Thomas says he spoke with an officer about the case, and he feels that their evidence does not tie his father to this case. The evidence only ties him to the assault. He said that they do not have a weapon or fingerprints. Thomas is hoping to shift the focus to remembering his dad as a pillar in his community and life. He said his father was the type of man that regularly showed up for his children and always took care of his responsibilities. Kinston police said that they cannot comment on this due to the family taking legal action against them. In 1972, an Army soldier, Gregory Dahl Nickell, was out on a date when he was fatally gunned down, and his date was kidnapped and assaulted. The case would eventually go cold, but will finally be solved more than 5 decades later. 21-year-old Gregory Nickell, who was home in Vernal, Utah for Thanksgiving, was out on a date with an 18-year-old woman who was not named on November 26, 1972, when they were ambushed. They were parked at a scenic overlook on Highway 40 when a man knocked on the window and claimed he had been in a crash. The man asked for a ride back into town, and when Gregory agreed to help, he was shot at least 3 times. The suspect then hijacked Gregory's car with a woman inside, meeting up with a second suspect further down the highway. The two drove to what is now known as Brow Reservoir, where they allegedly set Gregory's car on fire with him still inside. They then kidnapped the woman and assaulted her. The two suspects held the woman against her will for several hours before releasing her just east of Duchesne City, where she later found help and DNA evidence was collected. Gregory's date told the sheriff's office what happened that night, according to her recollection. She told the investigators at the time that Gregory had attempted to shield her from the barrage of bullets, believing some of the shots were also meant for her. She recalled that they definitely had ended his life. She did not know who the suspects were, and it took the detectives decades to figure out their identities. For years, then Uintah County Sheriff Arden Stewart investigated the case, but was unable to identify or locate the suspects, and the case eventually went cold. In 2019, the sheriff's office resubmitted evidence collected in 1972 to the Utah State Crime Lab, which included DNA evidence collected from Gregory's date at the hospital at the time of the attack. Then, in 2022, on the 50th anniversary of Gregory's slaying, the sheriff's office announced that through extensive DNA testing, Daniel Arthur Bell was one of the 2 men involved in the case. But Bell was never arrested in the case. He passed away in 2019 at the age of 88. However, the detectives believed the second, younger suspect was still out there and continued to pursue their investigation. When Bell was first on their radar as a suspect, the detectives spoke to his widow and learned that before his demise, Bell was convicted of assault in Oregon in 1987 and that his friend Gene was involved in an assault in Washington. The last time Bell had seen Gene was in the 1980s or 90s, according to the probable cause statement. The authorities then responded to the residence of Daryl Eugene Choate on an unrelated call and obtained a DNA sample, which was compared with the DNA sample of the unknown suspect in the Utah cold case slaying. According to the charging documents filed, DNA testing revealed that Choate is a direct DNA match for one of the suspects who was responsible for the slaying of Gregory Nickell and the assault of the woman who was on the date with him. This direct DNA match is proof that Choate is one of the two suspects and is not just a close familial match to one of the suspects. The detectives learned that 74-year-old Choate, who lives in Tooele, Utah, has an extensive criminal record, which did include offenses in Price. According to the charges, Choate has also made statements in records that he believes he is able to read minds. Gregory's sister, Lynette Nickell Ray, said in a statement, "When my brother was slain, I talked to him. Of course he was not there, but I knew he was there in spirit, and I told him 52 years ago that I was never going to stop. I was going to find who did this to him. I just want to be able to look him in the face and ask him why." On November 1st, 2024, Choate was charged with first-degree felony slaying. However, due to unspecified medical issues, he was not arrested at that time. On November 26, 52 years to the day of when the crime occurred, Choate was arrested and transported to Vernal, where he is being held in the Uintah County Jail. In the quiet town of Jeanerette, Louisiana, a cold January morning in 1994 brought with it a heartbreaking discovery. Tucked behind a local car wash, a newborn baby girl was found abandoned inside a metal trash can. Her short life ended before it had truly begun. For years, the child remained nameless, known only as Baby Jane Doe, as the mystery surrounding her demise grew colder with time. But after 25 years of silence, an unexpected breakthrough surfaced, one that would finally unravel the secrets of the past and reveal the shocking truth. It was an ordinary chilly morning on January 24th, 1994, when Bob Fontenot, the owner of Bob's Car Wash in Jeanerette, Louisiana, made a discovery. As he took out the trash, something caught his eye: a 55-gallon metal drum tucked behind the car wash. Curiosity turned to horror as he peered inside and saw the tiny, lifeless form of a newborn baby girl. The infant, later dubbed Baby Jane Doe by investigators, lay in the trash with her thumb in her mouth, her umbilical cord and placenta still attached. The baby had been alive for only a few short hours before succumbing to the biting cold. The temperatures had dipped into the 40s overnight, and inside the frigid metal drum, the baby had frozen to their devastating end. The authorities were quickly called to the scene, but the initial investigations revealed few clues. There were no signs of external or internal trauma on the child's body, but a blanket, girdle, and a 4-day-old receipt found near the scene suggested that the baby's birth had been hidden. Despite extensive efforts by local law enforcement, including acting police chief Kerry Davis's vow to find the mother, the case soon grew cold. Leads fizzled out, and DNA technology at the time could not provide definitive answers. The funeral held for Baby Jane Doe saw hundreds of mourners from Jeanerette gather to honor the baby that they had come to consider their own. Officers from the Jeanerette Police Department acted as pallbearers, and townspeople donated a white christening gown, a bonnet, and even a Raggedy Ann doll to ensure that the baby would not be buried alone. The investigation stretched on for years, with no name, no suspect, and no answers, until 25 years later, when a renewed push to solve the case would finally crack it wide open. In 2019, a breakthrough emerged from the least expected source: advances in DNA technology. It began when the Iberia Parish Sheriff's Office reopened the cold case after a renewed push from a local cold case advocacy group determined to bring justice to the forgotten infant. Detective Scott Hotard took the lead, and with the help of the Acadiana Criminalistics Laboratory, evidence collected at the crime scene was re-examined with fresh eyes. This time, cutting-edge DNA analysis developed a profile that had been impossible to obtain decades earlier. Through CODIS, a familial match was identified, and for the first time in 25 years, a new suspect was on the horizon. After further investigation, Detective Hotard traced the DNA to a woman named Sonia Charles, a 50-year-old resident of New Iberia. A DNA sample was obtained from Charles, and when the lab results confirmed the match, the truth finally came to light. Sonia Charles was the mother of baby Jane Doe. After her arrest in 2019, Charles was charged with first-degree slaying for abandoning her newborn daughter in a trash can in 1994, leading to the baby's tragic demise from hypothermia. As news of the arrest spread, the community that had long mourned the baby's tragic end was shaken once again. Many had believed the case would remain unsolved, but with Charles facing serious charges, the wheels of justice began to turn. Charles was booked into the Iberia Parish Jail, awaiting her bond hearing. The legal process was just beginning. In 2023, a grand jury in the 16th Judicial District Court indicted Charles on a charge of second-degree slaying, signaling the case would move forward to trial. The indictment brought renewed attention to the tragedy and raised many questions about what led Charles to abandon her newborn in such a cruel manner. The defense was expected to argue for a reduction in the charge, possibly focusing on the circumstances surrounding the pregnancy and Charles's state of mind at the time. But prosecutors remained steadfast in their pursuit of justice for the infant, contending that her deliberate actions led directly to the baby's end. As the case moved through the courts, the people of Jeanneret held on to hope that baby Jane Doe would finally receive not only justice, but also the dignity of a proper identity, a name to replace the anonymity she had carried for 25 years. A loving mother of 6 from Phoenix, Arizona, was fatally shot in her home in 1998. The name of the shooter remained unknown for more than 2 decades, but the police knew what the suspect looked like. Then, finally, in 2016, the police learned his name, but although they knew who he was, he remained on the loose until he was finally located and brought to justice. On July 9, 1998, at around 11:12 p.m., 28-year-old Sarah Jane Carr was shot inside her home near 14th Street and McDowell Road. A 911 caller told a dispatcher that a girl had been shot and that it was a man that had pulled the trigger. When the Phoenix police officers responded to the scene, as they entered the home, they found Sarah Jane deceased on the ground. She had been fatally shot in the face. The witness who called 911 saw the man who shot her and gave the police a description. The case was turned over to the detectives from the Phoenix Police Department's slaying unit. The original detectives who worked this case only knew the man by his nickname, G. However, they could not find out what the suspect's full name was. The investigation into Sarah's case went cold over the years, as the detectives were not able to identify the person responsible. Then, finally in 2016, the cold case detectives were able to use new technology to connect the shooting to 58-year-old Javier Lorenzano Nunez. The detectives learned that Lorenzano Nunez spent several years in California after he committed the crime before he moved to Mexico. Nearly 10 years after he was identified, the police in Phoenix and the Maricopa County Attorney's Office indicted him and issued an arrest warrant for Sarah's slaying. The detectives contacted the U.S. Justice Department's Office of Internal Affairs, who worked with the law enforcement officials in Mexico to locate and arrest Lorenzano Nunez. The Department of Justice and the U.S. Marshals Service worked to finalize and complete the extradition of 58-year-old Lorenzano Nunez to Phoenix on October 23, 2024. The Phoenix Police Department took custody of Lorenzano Nunez, and he was then booked into jail for the outstanding warrant related to the case. After 26 years, the suspect in the case of Sarah Jane will face accountability and charges related to his actions in July 1998. Peggy Carr, Sarah's sister, said, "I think she was dancing in heaven right now. Sarah Jane was a loving mother to her 6 children. Her children mostly know her through the cherished memories of others. She had a very kind heart." Sarah's daughter, Jessica Miller, said, "She loved the band, Journey, So anytime Journey comes on, it is very hard to listen to, but I always think of her. Sarah's family worried for years that justice would never come, but they never worried about forgetting her. Gregory Miller, her oldest son, who was 11 when she was slain, said, "I remember her always being there, doing right by her kids. She was a great mom. She was really tough." Sarah's other son, Garrett, took his grief and turned it into a mission to serve others as a police officer in Austin, Texas. Garrett said, "Growing up the way I felt of will I ever get justice? Will I ever get closure? I did not like that feeling, and I did not want other people to feel that." A special set of handcuffs were gifted to him after he graduated from the academy. He wanted to use those handcuffs on the man responsible for his mother's demise. Garrett said that it was a pinnacle point for him when he was finally able to hand his handcuffs over to the detective and see the detective trade out the marshal's handcuffs for his handcuffs. Her family was overwhelmed with emotion after they learned that Lorenzano Nunez was charged with slaying. The family's message to others searching for justice in cold cases is to never lose hope and to stay in contact with the detectives investigating these cases, but to also be patient as justice sometimes takes time. In 1988, a loving son, brother, and friend, as well as a respected teacher and a good neighbor, was brutally taken from this world. Significant forensic evidence led the police to catch the person responsible. 36-year-old Byron Howard Carr was an English teacher at Montague Regional High School. In the early morning hours of November 11, 1988, Byron was strangled with a towel in his bedroom in his home on Lapthorne Avenue, Charlottetown, Canada. His body also had multiple stab wounds. Byron's slaying shook the city, Byron's friends, family, and the LGBTQ community. When his body was found, there was a message written in ink on his wall saying, "I will slay again." The police said that they believe Byron had consensual intercourse with a young man he brought home, and they presumed that the young man was the perpetrator. Byron kept his sexuality a secret, but it was brought to light when he lost his life. Chief Brad McConnell called the era a dark and unfortunate time in Prince Edward Islanders' history that forced people like Byron to socialize in the shadows and take unnecessary risks. This case has been Prince Edward Island's only cold case in modern times. The case remained cold for many years until it was reopened in 2007. The police were pinning their hopes on advances in DNA technology, particularly evidence gathered from underwear found in Byron's home. Genetic genealogy was used to match DNA from the crime scene. Chief McConnell said, "Combining advances in DNA with some genetic genealogy work, we were able to identify one of the individuals associated to those profiles found at the crime scene. Through that, we were able to identify Todd Joseph Gallant as being the donor of the evidence that we believe was deposited by the individual that was with Byron." The police chief said finding a genetic genealogy match can be a painstaking process. It involves collecting DNA samples from crime scene exhibits, generating a genetic profile, then uploading that profile through a law enforcement mechanism to genealogy websites like Family Tree DNA and GED Match. This can eventually lead to a familial DNA match with other samples profiled on those sites. The Charlottetown police were assisted by Wyndham Forensics Group and Convergence Investigative Genetic Genealogy during the investigation into the case of Byron. Chief McConnell said that Gallant has a previous criminal record in Canada, Texas, and Arkansas. He has previously been convicted of a break and enter in Prince Edward Island in 1987. Just a year before the tragic demise of Byron. According to the police, Gallant left the island sometime after 1988 and returned only in 2022. The Charlottetown police are working with other law enforcement agencies to determine a timeline of Gallant's movements over the past 35 years. 56-year-old Todd Joseph Gallant, also known as Todd Joseph Irving, was arrested on January 25, 2024, at around 11:55 a.m. Gallant of Surrey, Prince Edward Island, has been charged with 1 count of first-degree slaying and 1 count of interfering with human remains. Gallant was 21 years old at the time of Byron's brutal slaying. The police also arrested a second suspect the same week, but he was later released. An investigation continued to determine whether he had any involvement in the case. Chief McConnell was asked whether he thought the case was a hate crime, to which he answered, "That particular answer is one we all want to know." The sensational note left on the crime scene would suggest it was. He said Byron's family just want to know the truth, no matter what it was, as to why Byron's life was so cruelly taken away. Was it just a hate crime, or were there other factors involved? It has been a long 35 years of unanswered questions and not knowing who the person responsible was. Byron's family is sad that the case took 35 years to make any progress, as Byron's mother and father had since passed away without knowing the truth behind what happened to their son. Byron's brother, John Carr, thanked the police and members of the public for their hard work and dedication to his brother's case. Gallant pleaded not guilty to the slaying of Byron in a Prince Edward Island courtroom. The case was adjourned multiple times so lawyers could receive disclosure. Gallant's lawyer, Chris Montagny, appeared on behalf of Gallant in court on July 4, 2024. His lawyer waived the need for a preliminary hearing, which is a hearing held by the court to determine whether there is enough evidence to send the case to trial. This was the 8th time Gallant's case has been called before the court since his arrest back in January. Gallant will return to court on December 10, 2024. Amber Lynn, Jenkins Garcia's body, was discovered nearly 26 years ago near a wooded area in Morgan City, Louisiana in 1998. At around the same time, another woman's body was also found. The perpetrator responsible for the crime on the second victim has been sentenced, but the person responsible for the slaying of Amber remained unknown for many years. That was until a connection was made between the two cases. On October 8, 1998, the Morgan City Police Department responded to Young's Road regarding a body that had been discovered behind Young's Park near the wooded area. When the officers arrived at the scene, they found the body of Amber Lynn Jenkins Garcia. The investigation commenced with the Morgan City Police Department Detectives Division when it was determined that Amber's demise was the result of a slaying. During the course of the investigation, the investigators collected multiple sources of evidence to be analyzed by criminal specialists. As the investigation continued, information and leads turned cold, and the investigators were unable to make a determination of who was responsible for Amber's demise. Just later that same year, on December 25, 1998, investigators with the Morgan City Police Department responded to the area of Duke Street regarding the body of another female victim that has been found. The investigators determined that the body they found was that of Jennifer V. Dahl. Her demise was also a result of slaying. The investigators identified John Willis Pittman Jr. as a suspect in the slaying case of Jennifer. Pittman was 18 years old at the time of the slaying. He was then charged, and he later pleaded guilty in the 16th Judicial Court to manslaughter. He was sentenced to 40 years at hard labor and was taken into custody by the Louisiana Department of Corrections. Over the years, the investigators looked at Amber's case to see if new leads could be developed regarding her demise. In the beginning of 2024, the investigators in Morgan City solved a slaying from a quarter century ago and did not have to go far to find their suspect. The investigators with the Morgan City Police Department Detectives Division resubmitted evidence collected from the crime scene of Amber to the Acadiana Criminalistics Lab. Over the years, with technology advancement in this field, the results yielded that the DNA collected from the scene linked John Willis Pittman Jr. to Amber's case. Thanks to the new evidence, the investigation was once again rejuvenated. The investigators obtained an arrest warrant for Pittman's arrest on the charges of second-degree slaying for the case that happened 26 years ago. Pittman, who is still incarcerated at Elaine Hunt Correctional Center for the slaying of Jennifer Vidal, will be charged with the demise of Amber as well. Pittman remains incarcerated and will be booked on the new charges while he will await court proceedings in the 16th Judicial Court. Chief Chad M. Adams and the Morgan City Police Department would like to commend all their investigators, from the ones that were involved in the original investigation to the ones that looked at the case over the years since, and to the current investigators who have completed the task bringing this heinous slaying investigation to a conclusion. The work that all these investigators have done has brought justice to not only Amber, but to the family she had left behind. She was a daughter and a mother. As this investigation comes to a close, Chief Adams and investigators with the Morgan City Police Department have been in touch and met with the family of Amber. Amber's family is relieved and very grateful that her case has finally been solved. The remains of an unidentified man were found in a field in Markham, Ontario, Canada, in July 1980. The individual became known as Markham Doe, and his identity remained a mystery until he was identified with the help of new DNA technology. In July 1980, the grisly discovery of remains of an unidentified individual were made on the side of the 11th concession between 14th Avenue and Steeles Avenue in Markham, Ontario, Canada. The discovery was made by a local resident. At the start of the investigation, the investigators had little to go on. At the time, it was determined that the remains were that of a white male who was between the ages of 25 and 40 years. Unable to identify the man, he became known as Markham Doe. The long delay in discovering the identity of the man was down to the condition of the body when it was discovered. The body was badly decomposed, and there was zero chance of getting a physical identification. Markham Doe weighed approximately 100 to 120 pounds, was 5 feet 6 inches tall, and had dark brown, medium-length hair. The investigation into Markham Doe's identity was led by the York Regional Police. Markham Doe's remains were interred at Mount Pleasant Cemetery, when in 2007, the York Regional Police Cold Case Unit performed an exhumation so that a facial reconstruction could be developed. Skeletal evidence was also obtained for the purpose of DNA testing. A year later, a traditional DNA profile was developed and uploaded to the National DNA Database, but there was no match to a known individual. In June 2022, York Regional Police teamed with Othram. Forensic evidence was sent to Othram's laboratory, and Othram scientists successfully developed a suitable DNA extract for Markham Doe. They then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the individual. This profile was returned to the investigators with the York Regional Police so that a forensic genetic genealogy search could be conducted. This search led to the development of new leads in the case. The leads enabled a follow-up investigation, which led to possible relatives of Markham Doe. On April 3, 2023, Markham Doe was identified as 26-year-old William Joseph Pennel of Toronto, Ontario. Joseph had never been reported missing over the years. In November 2024, the detectives announced what they learned during their further investigation. William had been in prison for a variety of criminal offenses, including armed robbery, which was committed while he was out on parole. Because he violated his parole, he was then returned to Collins Bay Institution in Kingston. There, he told his case officers that there were 2 others involved in the armed robbery of a Brampton Becker's store. William admitted to his role in the crime, but he refused to identify his accomplices. He told his case officers that if he funked, his life would be in danger. He was convicted of the Becker's job in April 1980. 2 months later, he escaped from prison. Records of the escape appear to have been lost. William apparently told a friend that he was planning to escape to South America. That was reportedly his last contact before the unidentified remains were discovered a month later. After more than 4 decades, Markham Doe has finally been identified. In August of 1934, Idaho's first full-time fish and game officer disappeared while he was on a trip to investigate illegal hunting near an area called Boulder Gulch in the mountains south of Mullen, Idaho. Ellsworth Teed failed to return home, and his disappearance remained a mystery for nearly 90 years. Ellsworth Arthur Teed grew up in Clearwater County and worked in the mines for many years. He then moved to Shoshone County and took on the job of game warden. Ellsworth disappeared in August of 1934 in a heavily forested area near Mullen, 100 miles southeast of Sandpoint. He got a call that there may have been illegal hunting of deer and game birds in the area. He had found evidence the previous day and went back out to Boulder Gulch to catch the poachers. Before he left, he said goodbye to his wife, Alma, and headed out in his Model A Ford with a packed lunch. He parked his car at the Mullen Cemetery near the base of Boulder Creek Road and hiked into the forested area. Ellsworth never came back, and his family never heard from him again. Alma told the officers investigating the disappearance of her husband that he would always tell her if he was going to be away overnight, and it was unlike him to disappear without notifying her. Ellsworth was expected to attend a neighbor's funeral later in the afternoon of August 28th. It was a service he would not have missed. Alma feared that he had been hurt in an accident or had met with violence at the hands of others. The city, county, and state officers, along with hundreds of volunteers, released from their shifts at the Morning Mine in Mullen, the Bunker Hill Mine in Kellogg, and the Hecla Mine in Burke, combed the hills. They searched for Ellsworth tirelessly. They even used bloodhounds and airplanes during the search. It was one of Shoshone County's largest recorded manhunts. When the officials combed Mullen, they found Ellsworth's packed lunch and his coat inside his locked car. They also discovered shallow graves of deceased deer and evidence of closed-season harvesting of game birds in the area Ellsworth was searching for the poachers, something that indicated that he may have been interrupted during his investigation. The case of Ellsworth was considered to be the state's oldest active cold case. Though the body of Ellsworth Arthur Teed has never been found, his demise has long been considered a slaying. Ellsworth was reportedly slain by the very group he was looking for, and these rumors swirled about in the Mullen community for decades, but could not be corroborated due to his body that has never been found. Alma declared her husband deceased in a court of law on February 6, 1942, 8 years after his disappearance. She was awarded spousal benefits. That is where the case sat, stagnant, until decades later. The story of the missing warden had been passed down through generations over the years. Each person had an extensive, detailed account of the alleged slaying of Ellsworth, and those accounts were all corroborated. Finally, in 2023, investigators believe they have solved the Great Depression-era cold case of the Idaho game warden who vanished in the mountains. In February 2023, Idaho Fish and Game accepted Ellsworth into the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial and Idaho Peace Officers Memorial to honor his service when he was lost in the line of duty that day in 1934. His award was covered by local news stations, prompting people to reach out to the sheriff's office about what they were told happened to him all those years ago. 4 people came forward with information about what they had heard happened. George Petland, his teenage son, John Robert Petland, and another teen, Oscar Downing, were poaching deer in the Mullen area and came across Ellsworth. Petland ended Ellsworth's life, and the 2 boys helped dispose of his body. Captain Seth Green from the Shoshone County Sheriff's Department said in a statement in February 2024, "We went down and verified people's family trees. They all did interviews, and according to them, the suspect told people, and the story was passed down. We also knew they would not have been able to hear it from each other. That is something you have to watch out for. So we are closing the case. 4 people who all said the same thing. That is the best you can get for such an old case." Captain Green said the sheriff's office will not be releasing witness statements or any more detail into the alleged slaying. Officials also will not be going out to conduct a search for Ellsworth's remains. The area has had its fair share of fires and heavy rains. which could have moved the remains to a completely different area. The chances of finding him is slim to none. Captain Green said it feels good to have tracked down answers. Ellsworth's remaining family is relieved to finally close a 90-year mystery. Adeline Watkins, an investigator with Idaho Fish and Game, said the case is so unique because of how long ago Ellsworth went missing. There are no police reports investigators could locate, so most of their knowledge was through newspaper records and word of mouth. Watkins still hopes more people come forward with additional information, even though the case is considered closed, and was happy to bring the Teed family some much-needed answers and closure. Ellsworth was the great-uncle of Melissa Sellers Teed's husband. She knew his 3 sons. She said that they often discussed their father and how they wished they knew what happened to him. When he disappeared, his sons were between the ages of 8 and 14. They were all extremely close with their father. Melissa said, "It was heartbreaking. The family was ruined from losing him. It was a sad story for years." Melissa said Ellsworth's one son was in his 80s when he passed away. Just before he passed, he was tearing up and crying, wishing he knew what happened to his father. She wishes his family had closure before they passed away like they did. Melissa said that she is most grateful for the investigators and the people that came forward to help a family.